sometimes you gotta wait. Go ahead now.
Okay. I apologize to everybody for the tardiness, as it ought to be pretty conspicuous to everybody. We had another meeting with about 17 or 18 of our members that were in attendance, so we just got out. And I'm going to wait just a few seconds more because all of them hadn't had the opportunity to make their way from the Capitol over here, so please bear with us. I think we got the majority of the people here, so we certainly have a quorum. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to call this meeting to order, and I'd like to ask Representative Mike Lanton to give the blessing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you would pray with us. Most heavenly and gracious God, we just come before you on this day and this hour and this second that only you could have granted us. Father, just thanking you for number one, for being the great I am. Father, we ask your blessings over this committee. We ask your blessings over the leadership of this committee and all those who came to be heard in this committee, oh Father, for the betterment of this great state of Georgia. We pray these and all things in the mighty and unmatched name of Jesus Christ, and those in agreement said.
Before we get started, I'd like to introduce a couple of people that are here that are pretty significant, I think. Judge Boyette, Superior Court judge from up in North Georgia, and an old member of this committee, Superior Court Judge Dusty Hightower, who left us, 2 years ago, to be a Superior Court judge. We appreciate having you here. We've got several bills today. And I probably don't need to say this every time, but we often have some very controversial bills in here. And, you know, in the last couple of years, we've had some emotional outbursts, and I would just ask that everybody, I don't think we're going to have anything like that today, but everybody conduct themselves as they would in appropriate government hearing. And, you know, if you can't, we're going to ask you to leave, and if you won't, we're going to escort you out. So I appreciate you following those rules. And the two bills we have today, I don't think will cause any great concern, but the first one I'm going to call is, I don't think I got a copy, yeah. House Bill 113, Representative John Carson of the 46th. Let's check our numbers here when we get seated, John. LC 392046. Okay.
Is that your letter from yesterday? Yes, they have it.
Okay, proceed, John. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to members of the subcommittee. Appreciate your time yesterday, and my voice is a little bit better, as you can tell. It's amazing what 11 hours of sleep will do. So just for a background for everyone that maybe you weren't here last year, or I think everybody heard of the hands-free law. It made a little bit of press. So basically, House Bill 113 puts back a provision that was more or less eliminated in the hands-free law. When we were going through the state and doing a study committee back in, what was it, Eddie, fall of 2017, one of the suggestions that we were given by various groups in Georgia was to simplify the distracted driving statutes. And we had three. We were encouraged to collapse that into one. As a result of doing that, one thing that was done was to eliminate the prohibition of basically kids under 18 using a cell phone while they're driving. Previously, there was a prohibition. So up until June 30th of last year, any any child under 18, basically with a Class D license or with a CP or instructional permit or what have you, was not allowed to use a phone at all, not even hands-free. Starting July 1st, they were allowed to use a phone on a hands-free basis, just like you and I would. The issue is a lot of kids are just not used to or don't have the experience driving. I was provided some statistics with the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety, as well as the CDC. Teen drivers are 4 times more likely to be in an auto accident. They're 3 times more likely to be in a fatal accident. And I can go on with a number of different statistics. There's about 34 different states that have a total prohibition on drivers under 18 driving. So, with all that background, what HB 113, and Mr. Chairman, I'm working on LC 392046. Is that what we have?
That's correct.
What this bill does, and I think everyone has a copy of this letter that I addressed to Chairman Lumsden for the subcommittee meeting yesterday. The main meat of this bill is lines 29 through 36. That basically prevents an instructional permit driver from using a standalone wireless telecommunications device while driving. Lines 95 through 99 prevents a Class D. So that's basically if you're 16 or 17-year-olds, what have you. This is somewhat new to me, and I had to really dig into this a lot with Legislative Council because I'm used to doing these kind of things by age. And these are not based on age anymore. They're based on class of license. So instructional permit, that's basically your kids that are about 15 years old getting an instructional permit. They're not allowed under lines 29 through 36 from using a standalone telecommunications device. Your 16 and 17-year-olds, that's a Class D license. They're prohibited in lines 95 through 99. And your motorcycle instruction permit, that wording is in lines 143 to 149. All we're doing here, folks, I know there's a lot of verbiage in the bill. I can go through some of the things that the Legislative Council has recommended for really more clarity, grammar cleanup, what have you, getting rid of repetitive words or what have you. What this really does is goes back to the prohibition that we had for kids under 18 to get them off their phones so they're focused on driving, they're focused on the roads, and they're focused on public safety before they also talk on their cell phone while they're driving at the same time. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to go through the bill like we did yesterday in subcommittee. It's to your pleasure, sir.
I think it was explained very well in subcommittee yesterday and received a due pass recommendation. And, you know, unless somebody has some questions about it, I tell you what, most people know I was a state trooper off and on for about 43 years. And
You remind me a couple of times, sir, yes.
Well, early on in my career, all we had was an operator's license and a chauffeur's license. And the federal government created all these different classes. And I tell you, most law enforcement officers now have to have a list that they keep so that they can look at it, because you can't remember all of them. And I'm glad you gave us the letter and set forth exactly what it does, because they are very confusing.
Well, I felt that this was one page, very helpful. Where's the meat of the changes, right? So, like I said, I'm happy to answer questions as best I can, Mr. Chairman, to the committee as well. But what we're going to is to getting kids off their phones until they're more experienced drivers, just like the law stated in June 30th of last year and before. That's really what we're doing.
And I served on that study committee that you chaired, and I thought you did a great job, and I thought we got a great result out of it. And the statistical data that's coming up now shows that it was very beneficial for our society. We're having less people killed and maimed in accidents. And I'll just tell you personally, you know, I had a guy run into my wife not too terribly long ago, and
yes, I remember.
He admitted to everybody, to the troopers on the scene, that he was looking at his GPS and lost, and he ran into the back of her and did a lot of damage to her, and a lot of damage to her vehicle. And
yes, sir.
I appreciate the legislation. We got a couple of questions here. Let's get started with them. Number 2.
That's me, Mr. Chairman. I got one quick question for you.
Yes, sir.
Representative, thank you for bringing this bill. It's a great piece of legislation. If say, hypothetically, say myself and Judge Hightower, when we were teenagers riding around in a car together, and I had my phone, I was a passenger, and I had it, and I was using the hands-free device, and he was talking on that. is there any way, have you thought about having legislation that prohibits the use of a hands-free device by anyone under the age of 18 in that car? Because you have teenagers that gravitate towards each other. And so if we're a bunch of teenagers in a car and we're utilizing that open mic, open speaker in a vehicle.
Yeah, I see what you're going.
You see what I'm saying there?
Yes.
I think if we have an opportunity to do the right thing and do the thing right, we might want to consider that. That may be something that would save some lives down the road. Because as we all well know, teenagers travel together and this technology is in the car. And the driver doesn't necessarily have to have his phone, but that phone can be on and they can be talking and communicating, and that might be something we want to consider with this piece of legislation.
So I think what you're saying is what HB 113 does is go back to the old law, which basically says a driver cannot use a mobile telecommunications device. I think what you're referring to is the speaker function on many iPhones and Androids and what have you. It might allow a driver to talk to someone on the passenger's mobile telecommunications device.
right.
Is that what you're correct?
That's right. Just food for thought there.
It's food for thought, definitely. I'd love to touch base with public safety to see if that's would be an enforceable statute. I'd kind of like to get more feedback on that, but I'm definitely open to that as we go along the process. I might like to ask the retired troopers. I slip up sometimes and say former. The retired troopers on the committee, the chairman and the subcommittee chairman, their opinion. I will tell you this, Representative Collins, I'm for saving lives. And it's not Democratic, Republican, it's not liberal, conservative, it's about saving lives. And when you have kids when they're teen drivers, they have 4 times the wreck tendencies that an experienced adult driver does. And that's when we want to step in and save lives.
And I don't mind speaking to it. I think it'd be very difficult to enforce. You can't, how do you know? And, it's the same thing with the newer model cars where they have the built-in systems and, you just click the thing on, you can't see a phone, you have no idea whether it's really talking or not. So I think it'd be very difficult to enforce. And I agree with what he says, because it could be something that would cause them to not pay attention, just as anything else does. But what we're looking for is things that we can enforce and try and make them safer.
If I may, Representative Collins, would you be willing to join me in discussions with State Patrol? I'm sure the chiefs of police and the sheriffs would love to have that conversation, because I think I very much admire the intent. I'm concerned about the enforceability. So what if someone's in the passenger seat and they have it on speakerphone? That would be a distraction. What if someone is in the middle seat of a 3-row seat SUV and they're talking on a very loud speakerphone, what have you? Could that be a distraction? Possibly, possibly not. I'd love to continue that conversation.
Representative Evans.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I want to confirm if a teen is in the car and they have a phone, and if they want to, if usually they play music on their phone, they can't play music on their phone or do a podcast on their phone or get directions on their phone. Is that correct?
That's correct. It goes back to the old law.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Representative Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Carson, thank you for taking time to bring this bill to us today. And the representative just kind of touched on something that's actually similar to what I was going to ask, but two quick ones if I could. One on line 95, I see the standalone electronic device, which obviously is different from some wireless communication. And my question was going to be if somebody were listening to, one of these young people were listening to some music through just a literal standalone speaker. So now that, just for clarification purposes for me, that would now be illegal. They couldn't even listen to that because it's a standalone electronic device.
That would be correct. And again, it's going back to the old law.
Okay. One further, if I might.
Certainly.
Could you speak to how this will affect points on license for some of these young people and their parents or anything like that?
Sure. This is, and thank you for that. This is a civil penalty. So if a child is caught, it's a
Just
civil
a fine.
penalty. They pay a fine. There's no points.
Okay.
These are civil penalties.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? We have no sign-ups to speak. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to say anything? Hearing no response, we have a motion to do pass. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, thank you,
Thank you,
Representative
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Heath. Senate Bill 25.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Earhart, I believe, is going to carry this. Would you mind if she joins me?
Not a
or
bit.
you
Not a bit.
What's your pleasure?
We're working off Senate Substitute LC 411720S.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Please start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I just want to start off by thanking Representative Earhart. I kind of overlooked that early in my comments yesterday in the subcommittee. She and I kind of launched on essentially the same idea at the same time, and I think I just beat her to the punch by just a few milliseconds maybe. But anyway, that's why we're here today, and I want to appreciate her her interest in the safety of our children as well. So before you have the bill that you mentioned, LC 411720S. Very simply, what this does is put back this subsection B to the way that it was prior to the passage of House Bill 978 last year, with just a little bit of clarification language on the end of line 14. We added the phrase that are separated by a grass median, unpaved area or physical barrier. Those are new words just for clarification. And for whatever reason, and I can't explain this to you, on line 16, we're changing a different to the separate roadway. Those were, I believe, recommendations from Legislative Council, and as I understand, gets us back to the same effectiveness that we had prior to House Bill 978. Let me explain, if I may, the situation that this applies in. So prior to House Bill 978, you had to have a median. If you got a northbound lane or lanes and southbound lane or lanes, if they were not separated by a median, you had to stop when you approached a school bus with its stop sign out and the red flashers going. This bill changed that to you didn't have to stop if those lanes were only separated by a turn lane. So I think the worst case scenario would be a 3-lane road where you got one northbound lane, one southbound lane, and a turn lane in the middle. So when this passed, I was contacted by one of the pupil transportation directors in one of the counties that I represent. He was very upset that this created a safety problem for our children. Now, I want to say that I believe that our school bus drivers do their very best to protect the safety of our children. They go through a lot of training. There are procedures in place, and I may mess this up a bit, but essentially when they're approaching a stop, they activate the 4-way amber lights on the bus, front and back, to indicate to a driver that we are approaching a stop. then it varies a little bit beyond that, depending on the model of the bus and what have you. When they activate the parking brake or open the door on different buses, those ambers change to red. The stop sign comes out on the left side of the bus. Some of the buses have an arm that comes out in the front mostly to keep those children from passing right in front of the bus because you can't see over the nose of the bus. So that driver is doing everything they can to ensure the safety of those children. And they are, to the best of their ability, watching their rearview mirrors and looking down the road, and they will not open that door until it is safe to do so. Now, we all know that people get distracted. Some of them drive a little fast. Sometimes you might have a stop that's not in the best place on a roadway, either in a curve a bit or on a top in a hill. So there's just no way to make this perfectly safe. But this is intended to add a measure of safety for those children, and it returns to the way that we were prior to House Bill 978. When this bill was heard in the Senate committee, there were a number of supporters that spoke up. There was 5 or 6 different groups that spoke up in favor of the bill. To my knowledge, no one has opposed the bill. So I think we've got pretty good support. And I want to thank Chairman Lumsden for the work of the subcommittee yesterday. So far, this bill has received unanimous support. And I failed. I don't know if Chairman Lumsden forwarded to you there was a letter of support from the Georgia Association of Pupil Transportation, and also a letter of support from the Association of Solicitors General in support of the legislation. And I understand the governor is supportive of it as well. And it was just, things have just fallen into place for this legislation. If you look at the Section 3, that was not in the original bill that I dropped, but because of the outpouring of support for the legislation and the interest of our pupil transportation folks, we've got this so that we could theoretically get it to the governor and get his signature if he chooses to, and get that safety out there for our children as soon as possible. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will attempt to answer any questions that you have, or members of the committee.
Well, I would just say that I'm in complete agreement, and I know that it was inadvertent last year when the law was changed and this occurred. And you know, my daughter is the director of human resources for my local school board, and everybody there communicated to her, the superintendent, and they're all in favor of this. And based on my prior experience, I've watched carefully all the time, and I've seen it. I call it sometimes the suicide lanes, those new turning lanes that they put in there, because people from time to time going in different directions will pull into that thing and be head on. But I've had the sad duty to be involved in investigating and talking to parents of some of these where children have been killed, and I'm glad to see it return. I think I've seen a lot of consternation on people where this occurs, where they have those so-called turning lanes, and people don't know whether they should stop or not. You see them ease up there and then move forward, and I think when we return to this, it clarifies it for everybody, and it's just great for public safety, and I appreciate you bringing it.
If I might add, I left out some statistics, and I can't give you the exact numbers, but I know that we have had children killed, even with vehicles passing on the right side of the bus, down the dirt, down the side of the bus. It's just an extremely dangerous situation out there. And if you will think about this, almost all of our students are on a bus twice a day. So there are millions of these students that are at risk when they're out there.
Of course, many of these buses now are equipped with cameras, but that doesn't do much good after the fact.
It
But,
doesn't bring the life back.
No. When I was Commissioner of Public Safety, I used to require troopers at the beginning of the school year to follow school buses all over the state to ensure compliance. And, I appreciate it. Do we have any questions from the committee? We have no questions. We have a couple of people who would like to speak to it that have signed up, and Judge Jackson, who comes here very often.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Gary Jackson. I'm speaking just as a judge only, not representing any organization. But all the school bus camera cases in Atlanta are funneled into my division. I see 250 minimum a week. Atlanta's been using these for many, many years, and we get repeaters, three-peaters, and even four-peaters. And to see this bill come in from Representative Earhart, Senator Heath, it's a wonderful bill. You very well characterized the turning lane as a suicide lane. It's confusing enough, and everybody should stop. I just want to get some legislative intent from this panel so that in deciding these cases, I will do what the legislature wants me to do, as good judges should do. I'm a little worried in line 14 about median. We all know what a median is. It's something that separates, but the actual word, I could not find a definition in Title 40. And I'm concerned about the raised medians like you'd see on Piedmont Road or you'd see on Memorial Drive or on the expressway, those very tall medians. And it's always been my understanding that if you're on one side of the raised median and the bus is on the other, you do not have to stop. But just saying grassy, if you just put in one and leave out the other, I'm worried people are going to think, well, they'll be confused about that. The only other issue I have is right now the window is open. What was illegal last May to fail to stop at a turning lane is legal now. And when these cases in the pipeline come to me every day, if you're at a turning lane, that case has to be dismissed because we have to decide the law based on what it is today, unless you have a savings clause like you have in Section 2 of the bill, which says, is illegal then, it's illegal now, and you're going to be prosecuted. The thing that worries me is the word punishment. The law last year changed the punishment. The first offense maximum penalty was $300, the second was $750, the third was $1,000. The new law says all the punishment is $250. But if you use the word punishment, an old case that's in the pipeline that didn't get solved, they're under the old punishment, which could be as high as $1,000. The exact same act done today would max at $250. And you have to decide, do we want to punish the old folks under the high law for the exact same offense that today would only be $250? If you leave the word and punishment in, you'll have a disparity in the punishment for the exact same act, depending on the time it was committed. If you take out the words and punishment, everybody will be punished the same, regardless of the date of the offense. And that's a decision that y'all have to make. And whatever decision you make, of course, I'm going to follow. This is a great bill. It's got some really good common sense about it. And anything we can do. My children rode the bus in school. I've ridden the bus. And those suicide turning lanes, Mr. Chairman, are just extremely dangerous. But whatever you want to do, I can tell you I'm going to follow it. Just make sure I know what your intent is so that we're all on the same page.
Okay, thank you. Miss Rebecca Gerst,
Good
Solicitor
afternoon.
General from Macon.
Hey, I'm Rebecca Greist. I'm the Solicitor General from Bibb County, and I'm here on behalf of the Georgia Association of Solicitors General to speak in support of Senate Bill 25. The error that occurred very, very late last year in the legislation really did create an ambiguity that made it very difficult for us as prosecutors to prosecute this specific violation of your duty on meeting or passing a school bus. I want to encourage you to please pass this in its current form. Section 1 does a very good job of further defining what we're talking about when we're talking about a divided highway, a grassy median, or a physical barrier. And I would certainly argue that, you know, a 3-inch raised median in the middle of a roadway is a physical barrier to someone crossing it in their car. So I don't see the ambiguity there. But I appreciate Senator Heath and Representative Earhart for bringing this very important issue to everyone's attention, and we're working so hard with all of us to make this happen and make it happen very quickly. This is a very important public safety issue because while most of these are handled with stop arm camera, civil penalties. This actually does have a very important tie-in to the vehicular homicide statute that would make it a felony for someone if a child was killed under these circumstances because someone didn't stop when they were supposed to stop for the school bus. Then you're looking at a felony, and this has been a gaping hole for the last 6 months or 8 months that we've been very concerned about. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have from a prosecutorial standpoint.
Do we have any questions? We don't appear to have any. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, number 29.
It's not a question. It's appropriate time. I'd like to make a motion.
Certainly. Lewis, I can't make out the last name, E-R-S-T-E?
Ersty.
Ersty,
Matt
okay,
Cardoza's
from
with
the
me,
Department of
but
Education.
I'll be very brief. The state superintendent asked us, he apologized for not being able to be here, but he asked us to convey his full support for this bill as is, and anything we can do to help, just let us know. It's made a huge difference being wrong this past so many months, make a huge difference being right. Thank you.
Any questions? 26. Wave. Okay, and our last person that signed up is Matt Cardoza. He waves. Anybody else in the audience that would like to say anything? Hearing none, I'm open for a motion.
Move that we do pass as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Do pass as presented. Do we have any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, in the discussion part,
Right.
I just want to just make sure that we have addressed the judge's concerns. He's come here 2 days in a row, and he's for the bill, but he has concerns about how he is going to administer punishment on some of these offenses. So I'm not hearing us talk about how we're going to make sure that these concerns he have are addressed. And I don't know that he meet with the authors of the bill yesterday, evidently not. So I'm concerned too, because if not, we might have to come back and revisit this. So he's very passionate about that, and I just wanted to know, had we addressed any of his concerns in this legislation?
Well, I'm not certain we have, but I think the grass median was in the old law, and I deferred to the judge, but I thought it was pretty clear to everybody in the state. I know the law enforcement community was very aware of what the laws were previously, and I didn't look at the dictionary to see what median meant, but most medians are grass. But if they have an elevated median, I don't think I believe everybody understands that that's a separate road. But certainly, if somebody wants to make a motion, we're still in discussion.
I would just like to know from him, are you satisfied with the current legislation the way it is? Because it doesn't sound like you are.
I'm just worried about the words "and punishment," because you'll have the exact same act passing at a turning lane that happened quite some time ago, prior to July 1, 2018. That act can be punished at 750 or 1,000 level. Doing the same thing today would max out at 250. It just seems to me that if it's the same act, it ought to be punished the same way. Of course, it was, I guess, more illegal back then than it is now, but you will get some of these old cases in the pipeline still popping up, and they will be subject, in fact, any old case in the pipeline, whether it's a turning lane or not, because the entire statute is being amended. Any old pipeline case will still be under the old punishment. It'll be decided under the old law, but it will also be under the old punishment. You took out the words "and punishment," it'll still be decided under the old law. It was illegal then, it's illegal now, and it seems fair. But the punishment will be the same across the board regardless of when you committed the act. And that's why the words "and punishment" kind of give me a little pause, because you're doing the same thing now that was done a year and a half ago, but you're getting disparative treatment. And that just doesn't seem to be fair. But if that's the way you want to do it, I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do. I just wanted to point that out. Better to have this bill pass as it is right now than have it hang up somewhere, because the lives are more important to be saved than anything else. And I think my sister and Bar, the solicitor from Macon, pointed that out. We need this bill, and if it's faster to get it through that way, then let it go that way. I'd rather save the lives, and I'll deal with that issue later. And I'll know that it'll be disparative punishment, because that's what the intent's going to be.
There is some intent to expedite it, but Senator Heath wants to speak again.
Mr. Chairman, I feel like the language that we got is addressing as best we can the issue that he's brought forth. By saying that you are punished, adjudicated and punished based on the law as it was at the time the violation took place is about as good as we can do. If we want to address a stepped up or a tiered basis for future violations, I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that, and that's, I'm fine with that. We just had a very narrow problem that we were seeking to fix here, and I thought that this preserves the best of both worlds.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree. I'd rather save lives and get to the governor as fast as possible, if that's the choice.
I think this addresses it, and I hate to say that we could come back again next year and fix it, but you know, that's open. There's a lot of initiative to get this thing on the books so that we can, and in fact, I believe with the language here, the governor may sign this thing forthwith because he's concerned about it. I can tell you personally about that. So we're trying to push it forward, but you always come here and you always bring a good argument that's, you know, and you're passionate about what you do, and I really appreciate that, and I enjoy it.
Saving lives is more important than anything.
Right. And like I said, I've dealt with this, and it's a horrible issue, and you try and go deal with parents who've lost a 5 or 6 year old child because somebody's run through there in a hurry to get to work or to the mall or something like that. It's horrific, and they never get over it, never ever. So. We're still in discussion. Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all for attending today. I appreciate it, and I think that both bills were great and do a lot to make people safe on our highways in the state.